Hey, everybody. My guest today is author Stacy Ladyman, who wrote the book Shep and the King of Hearts. It's a novel based on her life growing up with a father who is a compulsive gambler. Stacy, welcome to the Modern Meeting.
Thank you, Adam, for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited. I usually ask everybody, the first question I ask is, do you remember the first time you realized that you had a problem with gambling? Now, obviously, you are not a gambler, but my question to you, do you remember the first time you realized that your father had a problem with gambling?
Well, I do. We lived back in Idaho, and it was a time where he was gone from home all the time, gambling, and then we were starting to get phone calls at the house. People wanted to collect his gambling debts, and so
Mm.
it was putting us in a crazy situation, and that's my first memory.
So how old were you when this happened?
Probably more like 6, really
Wow.
young.
So
But
so yeah, so literally some of your first memories is someone coming to your house asking for money.
yeah, they were calling, and he was a principal of a school, so he was had a big job. I mean, he was responsible for a lot of people,
Hmm.
and he's vice principal, I think, at the time, and he held a master's in education. So he had a day job, but
Mm.
he was definitely involved in poker playing, and so that's my first memories.
So obviously, for those of us who haven't had a chance to finish reading the book yet or who aren't familiar, give us before we get into the book, talk about from your perspective just kind of like the timeline of when your father started gambling and what it led to and how long and you know just kind of give us the abridged timeline.
Yeah, it's funny because even this past week I was back with some family and we were discussing, this, and we were kind of reminiscing about his father, and I never met my grandfather on that side, and the legend has it that he was a gambler of some
Hmm.
sort, but he left the home early, so that made my father's childhood be without a father. But he had this image, and he had so what we were trying to grasp in this conversation last week was, gee, what was instilled in my dad that might have carried forward. So
Hmm.
um, I think there were a few gamblers on that side of the family that he might have gleaned something from. I just don't know. But
For sure.
as far as timelines for our own family, as my mom's told us, they got married, and we were reading all these letters. You've hit me, Adam, at a time when I was back moving some stuff out of my mom's home. So we found all these letters that my father had written my mother,
Mm.
and I'd never read them. And they were incredible. It was a different time, and he was definitely in love with my mom, and so they began their life. But I think that really those first number of years were fine. They were doing all right. He wasn't involved in any gambling, to my knowledge. But then I think they were married 25 years. That's rough that I'm recalling. So I would say probably the first 10 or 12 years were fine. And
Hmm.
then what happened was he was a vice principal of this school, and he came home and he told my mom that, you know, there was an Elks Club next door, and he went over there for his lunch hour, and they were playing poker. And she said, "Well, they're playing poker. Are they betting?" And he said, "Yeah, they were." And she said, "Oh boy." And he said, "Yeah, it's too rich for my blood. I'm not going to get involved in that."
Mm.
Well, that's exactly what happened. So the timeline then from him getting involved in that and to the point where my mother decided that enough was enough. And she had really worked at the marriage. She had been in it a good 5 years of turmoil, I would
Mm.
say, before she said, okay. that this is it. We can't do this anymore. So
Right.
um, I was 10 by that time.
Okay.
And, like I said, at that point, they had been married over 20 years. So,
And so
for-
knowing the story a little bit, so he ended up leaving. Now, did he leave on his own accord? Was it your mom saying like you either got to stop or you can't be here? What happened?
actually, we left him.
Oh, okay.
Um, we left him and uh, we moved back to the South to my mom's, hometown, and actually where my dad was from too. But he had just, we'd moved out west for job opportunities for them. And so my mom decided to go back home. And by the way, money was very tight because of his gambling, so
Mhm.
tight so that my grandfather, my mother's father, had to help us financially move back. If it hadn't been for him, we wouldn't have been able to do it.
Mm.
And at that point in time, you didn't just, it's not like today, if you're going to get a divorce and you take your kids to another state, you, you, you can't do that exactly now, but back then, you could, and he wasn't putting up any qualms about it. Although he came back into our life at different stages,
Mm.
um, not permanently, but I have to believe that he wanted to have a relationship with us. He just couldn't do it because of his gambling.
Now, I want to ask you about that, but I want to go back real quick. You were talking about, his father, what he passed on. In your opinion, what do you think about gambling, the disease itself as it being genetic? And I know listening to some of your previous interviews, he taught you and your siblings how to play poker, right? So did you or your siblings ever have any moments where gambling became a problem, or did you guys just never it never stuck the way it did with your father?
We didn't. We To this day, none of us have gambled. It's just not been something. It just actually kind of just, churns my stomach when I go into, I've been out to Las Vegas several times with my husband for meetings and things like that. And the thing is, Adam, as we know, there's a lot of people that gamble and they could do it safely, I guess. But, for me, I never chose that because it just, for what it had done to my family, it just turned my stomach. So I had no desire
Mm.
for it.
And
So
and did anyone else in your family, besides your father and his father, like struggle with addiction?
no, not that I know of.
Wow.
So I really, and I know there's a whole side to this, but I feel like my dad was driven a little bit by finances and money. He wanted a better life. Like he didn't really get to do what he wanted to do in life for his job.
Hmm.
I think he wanted to be an engineer or, build roads and bridges. He talked about that. And my mom even said, "Hey, go back to school. We can make that happen." And he said, "No, no, it's too late." And so he really didn't get to do what he wanted to do. And I think that some of that fed into the fact, well, okay, now I'm on this teacher salary and I don't have the money that I want to. And what will money do for me? Money will make me be, I don't, it might make my self-esteem, be higher. I
Mm.
think that was really, as we talk about gambling, I think that it's a mental health issue in a lot of ways. And so I think for him, there was some deep-seated insecurities. Like I say, his dad may have gambled, but his dad also left the family very young. So
Hmm.
my dad was raised by his mother and her aunt. And, you know, as I talk about in my book, in Shep, the King of Hearts, who my dad, the character name is Jim, he was a big kind of a, cowboy type of figure. He liked that. He loved to be outdoors, fishing and hunting. Even in these letters I uncovered last week, he was talking about fishing and hunting with my mom, like on every letter.
Mm.
And I was like, wow, he really did love to do that. And he
Mm.
was very adept at it. So, he was that type of figure. And so to be raised by these two women, and I just don't think it really fit for him. And he was looking for more of a manhood type of persona, and he was trying to fulfill some of the things that he did not get from his own father. So
Yeah,
that's kind of what I've worked through over the years.
for sure. And we talk about in Gamblers Anonymous and 12-step meetings, we talk about the why, right? Like, why did we gamble? Why did we drink? And, it sounds like you kind of answered it, where his why, we may never know what our why is, but it sounds like his why was a combination of, yeah, some childhood trauma and, just having that dream world of like, all I got to do is go on a good run playing poker and things can change. You know what I mean? Like, besides that, do you ever think about that? Like, why did he keep going? Why couldn't he stop?
Sure, I do. And I
Yeah.
wish we had intervened. We
Mm,
didn't have the tools. It was like, it was the biggest thing just to get a divorce out of him back at that time.
for
It
sure.
was a big thing. And not only that, to say that, you were a gambling addict, people, I mean, it was definitely under the covers on that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm so glad that today people are out there talking about this, and this is why I wrote the book.
For sure.
Not only to just help and heal people that are searching for answers in this addiction, and as we sit in our modern world, the way the access to the gambling and everything like that. So I'm just, back then we did not have those tools, but I do wish even later, when we were able to see him, that we could have done something then.
Right.
Whether he would have complied or not is another story.
Mm-hmm. Talk
Um,
about that. So you mentioned that. So he was gone for a lot of years, and then he would resurface once in a while and come back. Was there ever any reason why, or was it always different? Was there ever like a common denominator of, up, he's coming back around again because of X, Y, and Z?
that's an interesting question. I mean, one time I arrived back home and the phone rang and I answered it, and he said, "It's your dad." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, what are you doing?" And he just, I don't know what he said. And then I said, "Well, see, I was a little bit selfish. I wasn't thinking about him. I was thinking more about me." I said, "You know, you missed everything."
Mm,
And I said, "You missed my high school graduation. You missed my this, my that." I threw it all out.
mm-hmm.
And he said, "Well, that's the way the cookie crumbles."
Mm. Yeah,
So,
that's
you know,
that's that's
I
tough to
thought,
hear.
yeah, I thought about this later though, and I'm like, you know what? I realized, I pieced together, he probably was in this neighboring city and he probably wanted to come see us. But of course, after he got that greeting from me, forget
Mm,
it, he was out of there again. So I think it's important for families. It's hard because there's the recurrence, right, of
mm-hmm.
the gambling, and so it's hard to know when to set boundaries, when to say, okay, it's really tough. We just felt like he lived in a different world from us, and I kind of set that scene at the beginning of the book where, as a child, I'm in the truck with him, and my dad had leased a ranch, again, I think to make some more money. And he loved, he could do anything like that outdoors. So he had some livestock and everything. And we were headed up in his truck to go up to see about this mare that was about to have her baby colt. And it just, the chapter alludes to the fact that he's into poker, he's into gambling. The poker chips are in the truck all over, but yet the daughter is she wants that relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and there's this moment in that first chapter. I won't give it all away, but she's looking to have that relationship with him, and I think he wants it with her,
For
but
sure. I
he can't get over the addiction to get to the relationship.
So yeah, so do you think that now was there ever a point where he came back into your life and he stayed, or once he was gone, it was just kind of in and out?
Unfortunately, he never stayed with us again. He
Mhm.
tried, he would one time I believe he did come back and ask my mother if she could get back together, and she said no.
Mhm.
I can't do it.
Yeah.
So it became this huge estrangement,
Mhm.
which is another thing that I deal with in my book, is that sometimes families can become very estranged from addicted loved ones.
Mhm.
And it's long and it's hard. It's hard to understand as a child why your parent wouldn't want a relationship with you, and it's also hard. It's just hard from every angle to see why is this happening.
Mm. I mean, when I think of, if I put myself in your shoes, I don't know how I couldn't hold any resentment. I would have been he wouldn't have I thought you were nice to him that on that phone call when you when he called you that first time. I would have been a lot worse. But you know, even to this day, do you find yourself have you been able to forgive him? Have you been able to, or do you still kind of hold resentment? Do you still how do you process those feelings?
Well, that is part of the story in the book.
Mhm.
The Chris, who is, my character, she has to come to grips with the fact she thinks she can change this father of hers that's an addicted gambler, and she runs a behavioral hospital. So she thinks she knows all about addiction and how
Sure.
to deal with it. But guess what? It doesn't exactly work out like that. So
Mm.
she has to realize that even if she wants to apply what she knows logically, that's not exactly how it's going to work, and that she has to change a little bit on the inside instead of him complying with everything that she knows would work to make him well. She has to come and change herself in order to deal with it.
Mm.
So that's where we get to the forgiveness part.
Mhm.
And, everyone everyone can mess up in this world. We're all human, we're all people, and we have to have that grace and that forgiveness, or we're not going to get anywhere.
Amen. So, at what point, when did you decide, you know what? I think I want to write a book about this. Like, because I know this is your first book, right?
It is.
Yeah. So take me through that. Like, when did you start the process? How did it work?
Well, it's funny because it took me a long time, Adam. It
Hmm.
took me about 9 years,
Okay.
and it's not that big of a book. It's
Right.
I've had a lot of people say, "Hey, I want to get this and read this on the airplane," because it's a good read, just that you can read fairly quickly, if you want to. So I realized that I was a journalism major in college, and something, just a still small voice inside of me, was saying, you should write again, or you should do something with writing. And I thought, okay, so I took this class at New York City Gotham Writers back before the pandemic, before, it was just online. So I did it, and the teacher asked on the first assignment, tell us about a trip that you did not want to take. And of course, I knew what that trip was. And it was when we were called and my father had died, and myself and my siblings had to travel out. He ended up in Salt Lake, and we had to travel out and take care of his remains.
Hmm.
So it was tough.
Yeah. And so you take that class, and at what point did you know when you took the class that you wanted to write a book about this?
No, I
No.
didn't. And it was after that kind of essay that I'm like, well, I actually felt God asking me,
Mm.
go, you need to write this story.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, no. That usually doesn't work out very well,
Right. Right.
but I remember taking my dog for a walk, and I'd be like, well, I'd give all the excuses. I'm not. qualified, haven't written a ton of books, I, haven't done this in a while, blah, blah, blah. Thank goodness that we have a loving, merciful God. And I was able to take my time
Mhm.
and surround myself with writers and become more immersed in the writing world to kind of really learn the craft, get into critique groups, all those things. And that was wonderful
Mm.
because writers are great. They just surround your they're just wonderful. They surround you and you can hear their stories and you just learn so much. So I did that, and that's how I began to start writing and drafting the manuscript.
And when did you decide that you wanted to do, a dramatization based on your life and not do it, more nonfiction?
It's funny because I said it in fiction so that I could it just helped me deal with it,
For sure.
It's like it's like a little removed and you can have fun with the story too.
Hmm.
I help people and laugh and cry at the same time. There's some funny things and if you take it all so seriously, it's just not going to be any fun at all.
Yeah.
So that's what fiction did for me. It allowed me the freedom to just relax and enjoy the process. Instead of, I think if I was writing nonfiction, it would be like, I wanted to write about Chris's longings for
Mm.
that relationship. And don't we think, I think that's in the gambling addict and the family member. I think there's longings
Of course. I,
and
I was
right.
gonna, yeah, no, for sure. And I was gonna ask you, so he didn't remarry? He didn't,
He did remarry.
oh,
I
he did
don't know a
remarry.
lot about his other family.
Hmm.
And I've chosen to keep that kind of his private world.
Hmm.
I don't know a lot about it. Um, but I chose to focus narrowly, take the lens and just really focus in on my relationship and his,
Hmm. Now,
between the two of us.
what did your family, what did your siblings and your mother, what were they saying during the process, those 9 years that you were working on the book? Like, how did they feel?
Well, that is a great question, Adam. I'm glad you asked it because they were fine with it. And I was
Hmm.
shocked. I thought, oh, they're not going to want me to do this, da 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 da. But no, they were like, you know what? This issue needs to be out there. We need to be talking about it. It affected our lives so big that, and we also laugh, the dad's little twinkle in his eye. He's like, "Woo, I landed in a book." He would, I think he would like
Oh
it.
yeah.
So we've all had fun with it.
Hmm.
And my brother, bless his heart, said, you know, a lot of money is spent on that every year on gambling. That we need to be out there talking about this issue. So he's in the medical field and he was like, versus that we're spending so much. And I thought, I'm so glad you said that. So they were all supportive for it and I appreciate that, I really do. And but that's another reason I kept the character just me, because I
Hmm.
didn't want to say from their perspective how they felt about it.
Mm.
However, I have had my siblings say as they read my book that they had some of the same feelings that I expressed
Mm.
in
Were
there.
were you were you the youngest, oldest? Was
Youngest.
you were okay? So when all this went on and when he finally left, some of the older siblings, they must have had a completely different perspective.
That's right. And my oldest sibling, he probably could have written a completely different book. However, that's why it was very important to me to go to them and say, this is what I'm doing. And then I want your approval. I'm going to
Mm.
show you a copy of this and I want to see if I've gotten anything wrong, if, you see things totally a different way. And they both were totally on board.
Mm.
So they said I had captured his essence, you know,
And I
which
think, sorry, I was going to say, I think it's amazing too, and it's not a coincidence that, this book became published and out as gambling is becoming this this growing and growing problem. You know what I mean? Like, so it's just, that's not a coincidence that as everything is becoming legalized and gambling is slowly creeping up where it's going to be a serious problem. That's why the modern meeting is here. That's why and now you have this book like talking about it where and I just think it's when I think about poker too, a lot of people think that, well, poker's a game of skill, you can't really get addicted to it, and if you do, like, what's the damage? I mean, yeah, but obviously that's not the case.
It's not the case. And, the thing that I've learned about gambling addicts are very smart people.
Mm,
You
we are
know,
we are very smart.
it's so true. The intellect is high, and
Yeah.
you can work numbers in your head and think about. And my dad was like that. He had a
Mm,
very broad vocabulary. He was mathematical, and there were just a lot of things that were working in his favor to be skilled at the game, and then later not so skilled.
mm. Right, right. So what has been the feedback in the recovery community?
Good. With
Yeah.
the book, you mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, I've gotten some very good feedback, and Adam, this book came out just before Christmas. So I'm just embarking on this, and I just did a interview with a therapist where we kind of did an interview talking about the client's typical client, like she might see, and how this book, and she actually shared my book with one of her clients, and the client was very happy with it. So I think I'm going to pursue more in those avenues like therapy, recovery, and see how my book can be an asset to someone in recovery, or they're doing their step program and all that. I mean, I have worked with people in recovery. I mentored a young woman that her name is Jennifer, and she is just great. She has made it through, and
Mm,
she's on the other side, married, doing well. And I was just at the airport, and I saw on Facebook she was taking a trip, and she was down and out at one point. So here she is. She's taking a trip with her husband, and I said, "Are you in the airport?" I'm in at gate 5. She said, "I'm at 15. I'm on my way." And we got to meet each other and hug
amazing.
and talk. And she's doing great. So I've worked with women and in recovery, and I know what it's like to slowly come out of that, and it's really helpful to well, it's you need to stay in your meetings and your do the step work and all those things, but my book I feel can be an added resource for something. I remember with Jennifer, like there was times where she just didn't have anything to do. She was at her recovery house, she had worked her shift in town at the local grocery store, and now there was some downtime,
Hmm.
and I think my book would fill a lot of those types of ways. It would.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
No. I So, we're taught in recovery that as addicts, we can't, we can learn from the past, but we really, it's not helpful to think about things that we regret, right? Looking back, and I guess this would be a question for your mom and your siblings as well, but do you guys have any regrets looking back? Is there anything you could have done differently to we all know that he would have never gotten help if he wasn't ready himself. But is there anything that you guys think that maybe if we did this, it could have possibly changed the trajectory or maybe something different could have happened?
that's a tough question.
Yeah.
I was a child. What do you do as a child? What do the other siblings do? And my mom is a wonderful, wonderful mom. I call her a protector. She
Mm,
protected us from
absolutely.
what could have been so much more harmful. And she brought us out to the other side of life. And I am ever, ever so grateful to her and to my grandfather and grandparents. Even my father's mother. joined, was it when we moved back to our hometown. She was there. We had Sunday dinners with her. So I was blessed to have this extended family that was supporting us in every way. So I it's hard for me to look back and say what could we have done different, except, my mother thinks, well, I shouldn't have. I think if you see a behavior that's going off the rails, it's really important to stop and say, this doesn't seem right. This doesn't feel right.
Hmm.
We can't do this. And we got to get help now, not tomorrow, now, and like you say, though, the addict has to be ready to do it. Um, Jennifer, that I just spoke of, she was ready. She was ready. She said she was tired of being sick and tired,
Yep.
and she was.
Yeah, I've heard that before. No, and honestly, as you were answering the question, I realized that you guys probably have no regrets because you did the right thing. You didn't bail him out. You didn't enable him. You said, "Listen, if this is the life you choose, we can't do it." And your mom made that really difficult decision. You know.
I think there was some enabling there at the beginning, and for
Sure.
for for a few years
Mm,
until it crossed a line, like I said, where they were calling the house and my sisters have to answer. My mother was trying to check where he was, and then, she was forced to tell a story. That
hmm.
that crossed the line for my mom.
For sure.
She's like, I'm not doing this. This is not invading my kids' lives like this.
Hmm.
And so it's hard. It's hard to draw those hard boundaries, but sometimes it just, it has to be that way. I wish the regret I have, Adam,
Hmm.
is for the relationship that I lost. That's what I have.
Yeah.
And I wish that I could have, like I talk about in the book, Jim, my character, he's a very outdoorsman. He can hunt and fish and was always camping. And I remember one camping trip we went on, and it was beautiful outside. And I would have loved to have had some of those experiences with him. And, that's it was lost
Hmm.
because of this. And it was, I know at the end of his life, he regretted that because he realized he had lost everything, and everything is your family, you know?
Hmm. At the end of the day, we always, yeah, always come back to the family, and we always, we I know for me specifically in these last 3.5 years of recovery, without my family, I don't know where I would have been, you know. So speaking of family, with you and your husband, do you have children? You and your husband?
We do. We have two adult children.
Awesome. So, as you were navigating through, your relationship and your marriage and raising children, where did your relationship with your father and specifically like his addiction, did that ever come into play? Did you ever, when did you talk to do your children, did they know about your dad and his problem prior to the book?
They did.
Yeah.
I didn't keep it from them, and we talked about it. It wasn't like we talked about it all the time. It was just that they knew that my dad wasn't in my life,
Hmm.
basically.
Hmm.
And then I remember, getting a call about him being ill, and uh, I remember my children playing just in this other room. And of course, they're now adults and grown and out of the house, but I had to tell them that I'm gonna go see about my dad. And so they knew it, and I don't think that they could ever, though. I think I somewhat shielded them from the fact of how hard that was for me. So when they read this book, they're going to understand a little bit more what it was really like to have that broken relationship. Now, my husband and I worked really hard to, make a solid family foundation for them. And,
Hmm.
we're not perfect. We're definitely not perfect.
Nobody is.
But yeah, I mean, we have our faults. And of course, when the kids are older, they'll come back and tell you what those were. I love that part.
Yeah.
But, but no, we both had divorced parents. So we came into our marriage, and we're celebrating 42 years.
Oh, amazing. Amazing.
So, my husband has this terrible joke. It's, about how young we were when we got married, that we were, anyway. So, but we weren't that young. I was out of college.
Hmm.
Um, so anyway, we've been married a long time, but
That's
we,
awesome.
it takes work. It's not just the easiest thing. And I
And
love my husband.
that's amazing. Anything that's, worth doing in life, we end up realizing it takes a lot of work. Nothing worth doing is easy, and
That's right.
obviously with this book too. But that's just amazing. So, my last question, I guess, would be, for someone listening right now who is going through something similar, not necessarily an addict themselves, but someone they love is, they think might have a problem. What's your advice to them?
Well, it my advice is take action.
Hmm.
Don't act like it's not happening, or even if that spouse, if it's a spouse, or if it's a child, an adult child, if they're acting like no, they're okay, I would still say take action.
Hmm.
Any way that you can. And sometimes it's very difficult because obviously it's got to be the addict that wants to make the change. But just to make the months and the days and the years go by, and the person gets deeper and deeper, deeper, and the relationship continues to erode, that's not doing anybody any good. And that's what I hope, is that people can read my book and say, I need to take action of this, even if it is where, they have their gambling apps on their phone and they've been spending too much time, to draw back and say, you know what, I need to create some boundaries and not do this. I need to spend time with my family, because that is one thing I hear, Adam, all the time on the podcasts I'm on the podcasts I listen to with gamblers. The time is it's unbelievable.
Hmm.
From morning until night, it is an obsession. It becomes an obsession if you're addicted.
Never shuts
And
off. Never shuts off.
that is, I mean, I'd love to ask you. I mean, how do you manage that? It's
You don't. It's unmanageable. That's what it says in page one of the literature in GA. But no, I mean, yeah, to your point, I I would go to the casino early in the morning. I'd be there late at night. I'd go rain, sleet, or snow, no matter what. And it was just you think you're managing it, right? Because you're still paying your bills and you're leading that double life, but it all eventually you hit that point. And for me, for my personal story, the reason that it took me 20 years to get help is that, you know, I had a loving family and a big support system that I manipulated into bailing me out all the time, to just keep it going. But yeah, no, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, the gambling addiction. It's no joke.
it's no joke, and it's real, and it can get a hold of you. And I'm so happy for you that
Oh,
you're in
thank you,
recovery.
Stacy. Thank you. Where can we find your book?
So you can find Shep and the King of Hearts on Amazon,
Hmm.
and or wherever books are sold. It's on Barnes and Noble, Walmart. You can find it lots of places. You can also go to my website, stacyladyman.com, and that's like a lady and a man, stacyladyman.com, and I've got links on there and everything too.
Awesome.
So
Stacy, thank you so much. This was amazing. The book is Shep and the King of Hearts. And once again, yeah, much appreciated. Thank you, Stacy, for your time.
thank you, Adam. It was a joy to be here.
Awesome. All right, we'll be right back. All righty. That was awesome. How do you feel?
I thought it was good.
Yeah, I
How
think
about you?
I think it went great. I think it was perfect. Yeah, it was awesome.
You're
We should hit stop right there.